Hi, here's my recording of myself doing the slideshow for artists who were scientists and scientists who were artists. I hope you enjoy. Maybe you'll find some inspiration. So some of the first inventor artists were the cave painters who painted on rocks inside caves. Why were they inside caves? Well, they may have painted outside, but the ones inside caves are the ones who survived. And some people have wondered, why do some of the animals have more than 4 legs? Um, and one theory is that the animations produced by the paintings, when looked at by people who were inside the caves with flickering lights, would make the legs appear to move. That's a theory proposed by Mark Exema. He proposes that these 32,000-year-old cave paintings were actually early animations. Do you think that could be the explanation? The zoetrope was first created in China by Ding Huan around 100 BC, but the first European zoetrope was pioneered by William Horner in 1834. He referred to his invention as the daedalum, a reference to the Greek myth of Daedalus. And you may be familiar with this. It's a spinning disc, and you peek inside and you see a single thing multiple times. You see it as if it's moving, and you can see these. They look as if it's a woman dancing and a man dancing. Leonardo da Vinci was a Renaissance man who lived between 1452 and 1519, and he was fascinated by anatomy, botany, astronomy, and geology. He made paintings demonstrating how liquids flow by putting ink in water and studying that. He posited the Earth was not the center of the sun's orbit, and he dissected bodies to learn more about biology so that his paintings would be more accurate. And his notebooks are filled with inventions that could not be realized in his lifetime, including the parachute, the tank, the helicopter, and even the calculator. Here are some illustrations from his notebooks. He would also write backwards to keep his secrets to himself. He hoped that if anyone else caught him and stole his notebooks, that they wouldn't be able to read. As you can see, these large screws are for pulling dirt out of the ground, I think. He envisioned lots of uses for gears. There's no knowing what could have been done if people had followed his designs. He is well known for painting the Mona Lisa, of course, and some speculate that the Mona Lisa is actually a portrait of himself hidden, disguised, drawing himself as a woman. What do you think? The theremin is an invention. Let's move way up to like 1910 or 1915 when Leon Theremin invented his theremin. He was working on something else, electronics for the television, when he stumbled upon a sound that could be controlled with his proximity to it. Because he was a violinist, he recognized, oh, maybe this could be used to make a musical instrument. So he patented the device in 1928, and it was very popular at the time. He would play it in music halls, and Clara Rockmore would perform his theremin. And here's a little bit of what it sounds like. People say it sounds like a woman's voice. The theremin was not his only invention. He made other inventions too, such as the Thing, which was a tiny microphone, and it was inside a United States seal given to us by the Russians. And when we found it, we extracted it and reverse engineered it. And from that, we developed something called RIFD chips. And we use those to study, we put them inside animals, very tiny chips, and we can study their migration, whether it's birds or dolphins or deer. And we even put them inside our kittens and puppies to help us find them when they go missing. So we have Stalin and Theremin to thank for helping us find our missing puppies. Brian May composed many of Queen's greatest songs, like We Will Rock You, and he's also an astronomer. He invented something called Asteroid Day to alert the Earth and the people who live on it of the dangers of asteroids. He also investigated radial velocity using absorption spectroscopy and Doppler spectroscopy. I don't understand that, but it's pretty impressive. And he was given a award by the Royal Canadian Geographical Society for outstanding contributions in the advancement of geography. And he plays a pretty wicked guitar solo. Raymond Scott. Fascinating Raymond Scott. He was an inventor and a big band leader. He never scored cartoon soundtracks himself, but his music was used in cartoon soundtracks, such as The Ren and Stimpy Show, The Simpsons, and he was very influential on Danny Elfman. And he was sampled by many hip-hop artists, including Zuko 103, Mad Villain, Soul Coughing, Lizzo, Mac Miller. Here's his most famous song, Powerhouse. You might recognize it. So in the 20s and 30s, he was composing these songs and appearing in television. But in the 50s and 60s, he was developing synthesizers in his own home. And he invented them. So he composed for a big band without being able to read music himself. He played by ear, and he forced his musicians to play exactly what he wanted without being able to transcribe it himself. But he also invented instruments that would make electronic sounds, and he composed mini albums called Soothing Sounds for Baby. Here's an example of his synthesizer music. And at the time, he was one of the only composers working with synthesizers. So he would sell the sounds to be used in commercials for spark plugs and Sprite and other things that people wanted to have a zippy, fun science fiction vibe. He developed machines that could compose themselves. He called the electronium the self-composing synthesizer. And the movie was made about him called Deconstructing Dad, The Music, Machines, and Mystery of Raymond Scott. Here's another example of what his synthesizers sounded like. Here he is depicted in his office, working with all of his machines all around him, all of his recording equipment. And his kids said he was a pretty absent dad because he didn't really want to be around his kids. He just wanted to be around his machines all the time. And he said, the creative process is the most enjoyable, inventing, experimenting, trying things for the rest of my life, just for the pure joy of making up things. Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo, who also composed music for Rugrats and The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, has purchased the Electronium, as Raymond Scott is now dead, and he's trying to restore it, and it's partially funded by Gautier, who had the hit, You're Just Somebody That I Used to Know. So a lot of musicians and music historians are pretty impressed with the work of Raymond Scott. Anna Adkins was a photographer, perhaps the world's first female photographer. She was the first to publish a book that used illustrations that were photographs. So she was using photography to take absolutely correct, accurate pictures of things like feathers and mushrooms and plants and flowers. She learned about the photographic process with her frequent collaborator. Here's some examples of her photography. Sorry to zip all around time, but yeah, this was in 1843. Another woman was Hedy Lamarr, and she was a German immigrant. She came to the United States fleeing the rise of the Nazis. She left a husband who was an arms dealer and a Nazi to get to America to be an actress, and she was also an inventor. She invented a Coca-Cola that was in an Alka-Seltzer-like tablet. So it's a little tablet that could be placed in a cup of water to create Coke, so that the soldiers could drink that while they were on the front lines. And she was inspired by birds and fish, and she used those to develop a more efficient airplane wing. A movie was made about her called Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story. Her most significant invention was one she worked on with the avant-garde composer Georges Antheil. Now, this was a guy who was composing for player pianos, and he had a vision of 4 or 5 player pianos, all in sync, playing pieces together, some of which were playing at different tempos. And they developed this method for sending a message electronically from one place to another, and it wouldn't be on a single radio wave signal. It would change. So like a little bit of the information would be on this signal, and then a little bit would be on another, and a little bit on another frequency. And on the other side, it's also changing frequencies so it can hear the whole message. So it's kind of like a way of sending messages secretly. And she envisioned it to allow American torpedoes to avoid enemy detection. And it was ultimately rejected by the Navy and said, no, that's not going to be useful for us. But those same principles are now a core component of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and other military technologies. There's no way to estimate the value that she invented this thing that led to our cell phones. And she also was in films like Samson and Delilah, The Strange Woman, Her Highness and the Bellboy, and Dishonored Lady. Wendy Carlos. Here's a piece from her, The Shining. Main title was composed by Wendy Carlos. She also worked on Tron and A Clockwork Orange. Here she is when she was a young man. She was Walter Carlos, and she transitioned when she became an adult. After studying piano and composition at Columbia, she moved to New York City. She grew up in Rhode Island. And here are her albums, the first classical album to sell over 1 million copies, and the piece Switched on Bach. It was played on synthesizers that were monophonic, and at that time, these synthesizers could only play one note at a time. So to recreate these elaborate and beautiful compositions, she had to re-record herself over and over again and set the synthesizer to make a sound that makes sounds like flutes, and sound like horns, and sound like violins, and sound like pianos. So, it was very complicated to do. At that time, synthesizers might have taken up a whole room. They weren't small and efficient like they are today. And perhaps she was shy and didn't put her own face on the cover of these albums. But she made other albums. She made albums of the music that she composed for Clockwork Orange and The Shining that was rejected by the directors and not used. So she made kind of like director's cut. This is the music I would have put in if they'd used my music. She also loves space and cats, and so many of her album covers have space in them. And here's one with a mask. Perhaps that's a metaphor for how she feels. Maybe she feels she's wearing a mask. I like this illustration. It's got all these instruments, but they're all plugged in. They have electronic components connecting them, the clarinet, the French horn, the violin, the cello, because these instruments are simulated by the synthesizers. And she's collaborated with Weird Al Yankovic on a piece called Carnival of the Animals, Peter and the Wolf. Here she is with her cat, and surrounded by synthesizers. She also was really important for Bob Moog, who was developing synthesizers, to work with her to get her feedback for how to make synthesizers more user-friendly. So we can't really put a value on that. And she's also a photographer who took photos of the eclipse. And she's always been interested in eclipses, and she travels to where she can see eclipses. And photos that she's taken had been on NASA's webpage and appeared on the cover of Sky and Telescope. Just one more, and then we're done. This is Louis and Bebe Baron, who were composers and made the music for Forbidden Planet in 1956. You can see them surrounded by their electronic instruments and recording technology. They didn't have the full technology that others did, and so they were recording and then manipulating tape to arrange things. They composed the music for Forbidden Planet, and they were not permitted to be nominated for Best Soundtrack for a Motion Picture because at the time, the musicians thought that synthesizers weren't music at all, and that this electronic music wasn't even music, and so it shouldn't count as soundtracks. What do you think? I don't know enough about them. I wish I knew more, but it's fascinating that they were a couple who composed together. The couple who composes together stays together. So that's my presentation on inventors who were artists and artists who were inventors. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you know of others you can tell me about, please do. I'd love to learn more, and maybe I'll add more inventors to future editions. Thanks for watching.